The call came in at 0214, same as all the worst ones do. Reyes heard the dispatch tone and was already pulling on his jacket before the address finished reading. 12 years as a combat medic, 4 more running emergency response for the Meridian Colonial District, and he still got that particular cold feeling in his chest when the tone went off in the dead hours. Not fear exactly. Something older. The body knowing before the mind caught up. His partner Voss was waiting at the crawler with the engine warm. She handed him a thermos without a word. That was the thing about Voss. She understood the geometry of silences, knew when words would bounce off a person and when they'd land. They'd been running together 3 years. You learn a lot about someone in 3 years of other people's emergencies. The crawler hummed through the dark grid of Meridian's lower sector, past the hydroponic stacks and the row housing and the emergency pylons that still flickered amber from last month's bombardment. The Vreth had hit the eastern rim again, 14 dead, 22 critical. Reyes and Voss had worked 31 hours straight in the aftermath, and now here they were, 2 days later, answering another call in the same broken part of the city. The scene was bad. Not war bad, something stranger. The man was in his quarters, mid-40s, no obvious trauma, but his body was positioned like he'd fallen from a great height, every joint at the wrong angle, gravity having had its way from a direction that made no physical sense for a man standing in a closed room. His face held an expression Reyes had seen maybe twice in his career. The look of someone who had witnessed something so far outside their comprehension that the mind had simply stopped rather than process it. There was a small device on the floor beside him, flat, disc-shaped about the size of a palm. It pulsed with a faint bioluminescent glow, amber fading to green, fading back to amber, and it was warm to the touch, though nothing on it suggested a heat source. Voss photographed it from every angle while Reyes worked the body. The man had been a colonial engineer, mid-level clearance, no criminal record, no psychiatric history. His neighbor had found him after hearing a sound she described as the air cracking. The air cracking. Reyes wrote it down in his notes. 2 nights later, there was another one. A young woman, student, same impossible body positioning, same expression, another device. Then a third, a retired soldier, and then 2 more within a week, all of them in the lower sectors. All of them with that same device nearby, pulsing its slow amber-green pattern like a heartbeat. District Command wanted the devices quarantined and analyzed. The Observation Bureau, the VOB, which everyone called the Void, because their information went in and never came out, collected 3 of them and went silent. The remaining 2 sat in evidence lockup while bureaucracies argued about jurisdiction. Reyes started doing his own research on his off hours, because that was the kind of person he was. Voss told him he was courting an obsession. He told her she was probably right. She refilled his thermos. He found a xenobiologist named Dr. Ikaika Manu, who had published 3 papers on Vreth temporal research before the censors had quietly pulled them from the academic networks. Reyes tracked him down to a workshop in the industrial quarter, a space that smelled of solder and old paper, its walls covered in layered diagrams that looked, at first glance, like cross-sections of vinyl music records. Concentric rings, nested circles, each one labeled with a notation Reyes couldn't immediately parse. "What am I looking at?" Reyes said. Manu barely looked up from his workbench. "Time," he said. "How the Vreth understand it, how they've always understood it. Not a line, not a river, rings. Nested circles all existing simultaneously, all occupying the same space." He pointed to the outermost ring on the largest diagram. "We live here." On the edge of the record in what they'd call the outermost groove, the present, the leading surface. His finger moved inward, ring by ring. The inner grooves are the past, still spinning, still real. The Vreth figured out maybe 800 years ago by our reckoning how to move the needle. Reyes looked at him. "The devices," Manu said. "They're not weapons in the conventional sense. They don't kill directly. They push. They shift whoever touches them or ingests their field inward, toward the inner grooves, the past. Different amounts of displacement depending on calibration. Minutes, decades, millennia." He paused. The people who've been dying, they're not dead from trauma, they're dead from collision. Being snapped back to the present after whatever they encountered in the displaced time period. The body can't always make the return trip intact. Snapped back, Reyes said. So they go somewhere for about 7 minutes. That's the window the devices generate. 7 minutes of displacement, then automatic return, unless… Manu hesitated. Unless the person staying in the displaced time is too far gone, then the return is violent. What triggers the 7-minute limit? Unknown. The technology is theirs. We're reverse engineering it from captured units while they're 500 years ahead of us on the theory. Reyes stood in that workshop for a long time, looking at the concentric rings on the wall. He thought about the young woman, the retired soldier, the engineer with his face frozen in that expression of incomprehensible witness. How many of these devices are in the city? He said. Manu's silence was its own answer. Reyes had known about the tumor for 4 months, a slow one, nested in the tissue at the base of his brain, inoperable by current means. The VOB-affiliated physician who'd reviewed his scans had delivered the information with the particular clinical flatness that recognized as professional compassion. The practiced neutrality of someone who understood that any inflection, up or down, would be wrong. She'd said 6 weeks or 60 years, which was the doctor's way of saying no one actually knew. The tumor, she explained, was embedded in the region that processed temporal cognition, the brain's mechanism for placing itself in the flow of time, for understanding before and after, for integrating the sequence of moments into continuous experience. In most people, the Vreth displacement devices worked by corrupting this region, fluiding it. The brain to reconcile 2 times at once, and usually lost. In Reyes, the region was already damaged, already adapted, already running on a different operating system, in some sense. He wasn't sure he believed her. But when Manu, who didn't know about the tumor, explained why the devices killed most adults and only sometimes returned them intact, the 2 facts clicked together with the particular sound of something true. He went home and thought about it for 2 days. He called Voss on the 2nd night. "I need to tell you something," he said. She listened to all of it. The tumor, the devices, Manu's theory, the 7-minute window. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're going to use one of the devices. I need to understand how they work before I can figure out how to stop them. You need to go be a hero is what you need. Voss." "I know," she said. "I know why. I just want to say it out loud before it happens, because once you've done the thing, there's no space to say it anymore." Another pause shorter. "Don't die in the past." He laughed. It surprised him, the genuineness of it. That's a low bar. Start low. Work up. He got a device from Manu, who had quietly held back one of the evidence units during collection and spent weeks trying to understand its calibration. Manu had mapped the controls as best he could. He believed the displacement depth, how far back, could be adjusted within a limited range, though the 7-minute window appeared fixed. Reyes set up a recorder in the spare room of his quarters, angled to capture the whole space. He sat on the floor with the device in his lap and spoke his name, his rank, the date, and the current time into the recorder. "If this works," he said to the lens, "I'll be back in 7 minutes. If it doesn't, this is a record. If someone finds it, the concentric rings are the key. Time isn't a line. The Vreth have been treating it like a library they can reach into. We need to learn to do the same thing, because they're not going to stop." He activated the device. The room did not disappear. That was the first thing he registered, that the world didn't go dark, didn't flash, didn't perform any of the transitions that fiction had taught him to expect from temporal displacement. Instead, the room simply became different. Same dimensions, same basic geometry. But the walls were stone, the floor was earthen. The air smelled of vegetation and rot and distance. Outside the window, there was no window, just a gap in the stone. Something moved through brush that had no business being inside a colonial housing block. He was somewhere in the deep past, the pre-settlement era of this continent, before the terraforming cycles, when the native biology had still been running its original operating system. He stood very carefully, because the thing outside the gap in the wall had gone still, the way large predators go still. And he understood that it had smelled him. He had 7 minutes. The creature came through the wall, or rather through the space the wall would one day occupy. And it was low and fast, and covered in a scaled hide, the color of old blood, and it was hungry in the way that things are hungry when they have evolved over millions of years in an environment without mercy. Reyes had no weapons. He had his training, which included the fact that in any confrontation with something larger and faster than himself, his job was to reduce the number of variables it could exploit. He dropped to the floor and rolled left, and the creature's first pass missed him by the width of his shoulder. He came up with a piece of fallen masonry in both hands. The future wall crumbled back into its constituent parts and brought it down hard on the creature's snout when it wheeled for a second pass. Not enough to stop it, enough to make it recalibrate. He kept the masonry between them and counted in his head, and at 4 minutes and 30 seconds the room shifted back to itself. Walls, floor, his recorder blinking red in the corner, the device in his lap still warm. He sat with his hand shaking for a while. Then he got up and reviewed the footage. The footage showed him sitting in his empty room for exactly 7 minutes, perfectly still, before standing up and blinking at the walls. No creature, no stone, no past. He went back to Manu with the recorder and the footage and what he'd experienced, and the xenobiologist spent 2 very long nights running the math, and at the end of those 2 nights he had something that looked tentatively like a theory. The displacement was individual, personal. The device did not move you through shared time. It moved you through your own temporal position, your brain's location on the concentric ring, while leaving your body in physical space. The past you visited was real. The physics were real. The creature that nearly took his arm off was real, and had probably spent the last several thousand years wondering about that strange, hairless animal with the rock. But no one watching from the outside could see it. The displacement was interior, which meant the Vreth weren't sending people to the past to die from the environment. They were sending them to a past calibrated to kill. A specific ring, a specific depth, chosen for maximum lethality, a battlefield, a cataclysm, a geological event. The device wasn't a random nightmare generator. It was targeted. Reyes understood something then, looking at Manu's diagrams with fresh eyes. Something that made him stand very still for a moment while the thought assembled itself. If the displacement was interior, personal, then the same location time might look different to different people. The past wasn't a single fixed record. It was as individual as memory. What had nearly killed the colonists wasn't the past itself. It was the past the Vreth had mapped for them specifically, calibrated to their neurology, their temporal cognition signature. "Can you reverse the calibration?" he said. Manu looked up. "What?" "The device maps to a specific temporal profile, the target's neurological signature. That's how it knows which ring to push you to. Can you reverse it? Flip the targeting so it pushes toward its origin signature instead of its destination signature." Manu looked at him for a long moment. "You want to send the device back to whoever made it," Manu said. "I want the device to go home. 3 weeks. It took 3 weeks of work in Manu's shop, pulling apart captured units, building a modification rig from components that weren't designed for the purpose, running test pulses into a shielded chamber, and measuring the displacement signatures against Manu's theoretical models. Reyes ran emergency calls during the day and worked in the shop at night. Voss started showing up on her off nights without being asked, running tests, making notes, not saying much about it. On the 19th night, she said, "You understand what this does if it works. It sends the devices back along their own targeting chain," Reyes said. "Back to the Vreth operators who calibrated and deployed them. 7 minutes in their own past, whatever past that device is calibrated to reach. Their own past," Voss said. "Their own rings. Their own depth." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not just sending them somewhere dangerous. You're sending them somewhere they built to be dangerous for humans. A past loaded with human killers. No, Reyes said. I'm sending them somewhere loaded with whatever they built into their own device. A past calibrated to a human's temporal signature. The targeting chain works both ways. He paused. We're not the only species that evolved in a hostile environment. We're just the only species that keeps excellent records of ours. Voss looked at him. You're guessing. I'm extrapolating from incomplete data. Same thing. I know. The modified units were different in one other way that Manu had discovered almost by accident during the reversal work. The modification inverted not just the targeting chain but the window. The 7-minute displacement came continuous, not a trip and a snapback. A permanent redirect. Every unit in the Vreth network that shared the calibration signature would follow the chain. How many units was that? Manu's best estimate, based on the deployment pattern and the case numbers they documented, was somewhere between 40 and 200 in the Meridian Colonial District alone. How many Vreth operators were at the other end of that chain? Unknown, but concentrated. The network topology suggested a centralized deployment hub, someone doing the calibration work for the entire district, one node, one location. One set of hands that had spent however many weeks or months loading human death into a shelf of beautiful amber-green discs. Reyes loaded the modification protocol into 6 units. He and Voss distributed them through the lower sectors, leaving them in the locations where the original devices had been found, replacing the originals in the evidence lockup with non-functional decoys. The idea was simple and probably insane. The Vreth network would eventually query its deployed units for status. When it pinged the modified devices would ping back along the targeting chain, carrying the inversion protocol with them. The network would propagate the reversal automatically, the way a disease moves through a population. He didn't tell Manu that part. Manu would have had reasonable objections. The night they finished, Reyes and Voss sat on the roof of the workshop and drank from the thermos she'd been refilling for 12 years. The lower sector spread out below them, amber-lit, still bearing the scars of last month's bombardment. Somewhere in the eastern dark, the Vreth were doing what they had been doing for 800 years, moving the needle through rings of time, shaping history like a tool. There's a thing I want to say, Reyes said. Voss waited. He thought about the physician, her clinical neutrality, 6 weeks or 60 years. He thought about the recorder in his spare room, the footage that showed a man sitting still while the world around him became something ancient and dangerous. He thought about the concentric rings on Manu's wall, all of it spinning, all of it real. When I was in the past, he said, just for a second before the creature showed up, I was standing in this space that didn't have walls yet, just open air. Pre-everything, and I had this feeling. I've never had it before. I don't know how to describe it except exactly, like every moment in my life up to that one had been necessary, not fated, not planned, just necessary. The way the ground is necessary, you don't think about it until you're standing somewhere that doesn't have any. Voss was quiet. The Vreth want us gone, he said. Every version of us, every ring. They've been doing it so long, I think they've stopped understanding what they're removing. They think time is a library. You can clear shelves in a library. It's an administrative decision. He looked at the thermos in his hands. But we're not a shelf. We're the guys who showed up at 0214 when the tone went off. We're the guys who worked 31 hours in a bombed sector because someone had to. We're the guys who sat in a destroyed past with a piece of our own future wall and decided that was enough of a weapon. He paused. The clock's always been counting down for me. That's not new. But being in a place with no present, no now, I understood something. The Vreth have been in their rings so long they've lost the present tense. They live in the past and in the planned future, and they move through time like it's a resource. They've forgotten the now is where everything actually happens. He finished what was in the thermos. We haven't forgotten that. I don't think we're capable of forgetting it. I think it's structural. Voss took the thermos back. She looked at it. She said, The clock's counting down for all of us. Yeah, that's not the point. That's exactly the point, he said. The network query came 11 days later. Reyes was on shift, halfway through a routine call, when Manu sent a single word to his comm. He finished the call and drove back to the workshop, and Manu showed him the readout, the ping, the response, the propagation pattern spreading back through the network like a signal moving down a wire. They didn't know what was happening at the other end. They couldn't know. The targeting chain was a one-way communication in the direction it was now running. Whatever past the Vreth operators had loaded into those devices, whatever ring they'd calibrated to produce maximum lethality for human neurological signatures, was now playing for them instead. 7 minutes for each one that the network reached, or continuous, where the modification had propagated fully. The Vreth bombardment of the Eastern Rim stopped 4 days after the network query. Then the Western Rim went quiet. Then the interception drones that had been running continuous patterns over the colony went dark, one by one, over a period of about 2 weeks. Not shot down, not jammed, just ceasing to operate like equipment left running after the operators were no longer available to maintain it. The VOB issued a classified assessment that used the word disruption 17 times without specifying the cause. Reyes read it, filed his copy, and went back on shift. Voss was waiting at the crawler with the engine warm. Any calls, he said. Couple of minor incidents in the lower sector. Nothing weird. I'll take nothing weird. You say that now. He got in. She handed him the thermos. They drove out into the amber dark of the Meridian Colonial District, past the hydroponic stacks and the row housing, and the pylons that were blinking green now instead of amber. And the sky above the Eastern Rim was clear. Reyes had a follow-up with the OB physician scheduled for the following week. He didn't know what the scans would show. He didn't know what 6 weeks or 60 years looked like in practice, how you'd tell the difference from the inside on an ordinary night. He thought it probably felt like this. The engine humming, the city lit up around you, the person next to you handing you a thermos without a word, because they understood the geometry of silences. Because 3 years of emergencies had taught you both which moments needed filling and which needed leaving alone. The tone went off. Voss read the address without inflection, the way she always did, no editorializing, just the facts and the direction. Reyes heard it and felt that particular cold feeling in his chest. The body knowing before the mind caught up, the old signal that something was required, that somewhere in the city at 0214, someone needed the two of them specifically. He didn't think about the rings. He didn't think about the needle, or the past, or the tumor, or the Vreth and their 800-year administrative decision about what shelves to clear. He thought about the turn at the end of this block and the one after it, and the face of whoever was waiting at the address when they got there. He thought about now, the only tense that actually mattered, the only groove on the record that was spinning under the needle, right this moment, this one, this exact one. The crawler accelerated. The city blurred past. Now,